taxes, the environment, the economy, and fairer prosperity for all. In particularly with health, we are promising to find the £8 billion needed by the NHS by 2020, and we also want to guarantee, which is important, guarantee equal care for mental health. With taxes, we have already provided an £825 tax cut for average working families, and we want to go further than that and raise the personal allowance to £12,500. We believe in an opportunity for every child. Education is very strong. We want to protect the funding for that from cradle to college, from nursery to age 19. We also believe that it's very important to have qualified teachers in every classroom. Prosperity for all. Obviously, we've had to deal with difficult economic times. We want to balance the budget fairly. And once we've dealt with the deficit, we then want to invest in a high-skilled, low-carbon economy. And talking about low carbon, we're very passionate about the environment. We want to protect the environment, protect nature, deal with climate change, and we have 5 green laws which we want to propose. In government, we've got about 75% of our manifesto in government, so I really think that we've produced a stronger economy and a fairer society.
Thank you. Howard.
Thank you, Gavin. Residents of Farnham, I'm here tonight representing the Labour Party. My name is Kaye. I live local. I've walked down here today, I've walked through the park, I just live up there in Upper Hill, just on the village green. You'll probably see my house, because it's the one up there with the Labour Party posters adorning the outside. And they're not just my house, but also the house on the corner. So there's a little bit of red in Upper Hill for those people who are interested. For information, and for those that have had my introductory leaflet, which has been hand-delivered by volunteers, there's no money exchange hands at this moment in time for that service. They've gone out and given their free time to hand-deliver my introductory leaflet around Farnham and around southwest Surrey, down in Godalming, down in Hazelmere, and that is an ongoing process. By trade, I'm a train driver. I've done that for all my working life, which involves me at times like this week, because I'm not a professional politician, getting out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning to get in my car, to drive to Guildford, to get the 4:25 train to London. I work out of London King's Cross, driving what are the big high-speed trains. That's what I do for a living. So I'm not a professional politician, as I've just mentioned. So you might say, why have you entered this contest? Well, I've entered this contest because, as you probably hear from my voice, and potentially I don't need a microphone. I've never been one where the people have said, actually, Howard, you're whispering. It's usually the other way around, as in, Howard, you're being a bit loud. I am Northern. With that brings life experiences of an environment which is not southwest Surrey. I've seen the injustice. I've seen the poverty, and I've also seen people go without because of the austerity measures that are in place at this moment in time with the present government that we have. It's a tough gig down here in southwest Surrey. The Labour Party has never been the party of opposition. But within that, what we've done within the Labour Party is this. There's me standing in the general election on May the 7th. We are standing more candidates from the Labour Party than we have done in living memory. We are the party of opposition. The facts speak for themselves. Count the numbers of candidates that are coming from us as Labour, giving people an alternative. We are the party of opposition.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to your Hustings. My name is Louise, and I'm the candidate for the National Health Action Party. I've been a GP for 26 years. And I'm incredibly proud of the NHS. But I'm also angry. I'm angry about cuts, privatisation and chaotic reorganisation, about struggling services and record waiting times. As a doctor, I feel the strain, and I know that people here are feeling it too. I want to know that the NHS will be safe, but I also want a better politics, more open, transparent, and representative. I've met many people here who care passionately about their community, from sustainable local development to the care home closures. I want to help harness that energy for positive change. I have a track record of successful community campaigning. I will have no party whip, so I can genuinely listen. I want to offer the people of South West Surrey two things: the chance to vote, the chance to declare a powerful message about support for the NHS, and also the chance to vote for somebody who will properly represent you on the issues that you care about. Thank you.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gavin, and I want to start by thanking you for giving me the great privilege of representing you for the last 10 years as your MP. I've always thought that MPs need to be local campaigners as well as anything they do on the national stage, and I'm proud that we are starting after a long time to make real progress in plans to make the centre of Farnham more family friendly, more pedestrian friendly after it has to be said, a very heated debate. But I've also been a cabinet minister for the last 5 years, and I've been proud to be part of a government that has helped the British economy step back from the abyss and become the fastest growing economy of all the major countries. And as a Conservative, I want our country to be strong and prosperous. But it is prosperity with a purpose. And for me, that purpose is having an NHS that is there for all of us as we get older and our families. It's having good schools for our children. It's having strong communities. And I want to go on supporting those things in Parliament. But as I do that, I will never forget the people who give me my job, and I will continue to represent the interests of the people of South West Surrey on local issues as well as national issues. And I hope my track record stands for itself in terms of what I've done. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We could use a degree of civility this at the beginning of the evening at least. Mark, thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I too, like Howard, am not a professional politician. I have a real job in IT. I'm standing for election because I feel that this country is being so badly governed. We are losing our sovereignty and our freedoms, things that we used to take for granted. And our public finances are not being run on a sound basis. Now, I am a libertarian, so for me, freedom is the most important goal. We must limit the power and scope of the state in order to safeguard liberty and to encourage personal responsibility. The first step is to unshackle ourselves from the European Union. I want fairer, simpler taxes. No tax on the minimum wage, no bedroom tax, no mansion tax, and no inheritance tax. I support trade schools and grammar schools, so we can give kids from modest backgrounds a good start in life. Let's reinvigorate our democracy with local referendums, English votes for English laws, and a proper recall mechanism for MPs. And UKIP will protect the Green Belt, and we will properly fund our armed forces and the National Health Service. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Susan.
Good evening. I've been living in this area for all my adult life. I started here as an art student, loved the area and stayed here. I've worked here in the Maltings. I ran the gallery for a few years, and I've run workshops in schools all around the county. So I have a strong affection for this area, and I know it well. And I've decided to stand because I'm worried. I'm seriously worried, and I'm worried that we're running out of time. We know that climate change is happening. We see it on a daily basis now. And that climate change is already putting stresses on our social system. It's causing tensions, our financial system. And we have probably 20 years to to sort out this problem, to reduce carbon emissions to such a level that we can survive and carry on this planet. We're currently using, in this country alone, three planets worth of resources. It's not sustainable. And this is a terrible legacy that we're leaving our children and grandchildren. So my concern is that we address these issues urgently, we invest in renewable energy, we keep fossil fuel in the ground, no fracking, no oil explorations, it stays in the ground, and we invest heavily now in renewable technologies which are advancing rapidly, and we can make good use of them if we show a commitment.
Thank you. Okay. So that's as you will see, I'm going to try and keep people succinct because there's quite a lot of questions, and I think the audience will want to hear answers to those. So I'm going to move us straight on to questions. Celia Saunders, is she? Do you have a microphone? Very good.
Well, thank you, Gavin. I just have a word. My name is Saunders, not Saunders, in case people think I'm somebody pretending to be somebody else, because you know me. And thank you for choosing my question. This for the panel. Please, would all the candidates state clearly which service or services currently provided and funded free by the NHS to the general public they would find it acceptable for a future government to charge for. Thank you.
Jeremy.
None, Stephen, is the answer to that question. And I don't think charging is the right way forward for the NHS for a very simple reason. We have lots of financial pressures, and the best way to make sure we meet those pressures is through a strong economy that can generate the tax revenues that we need. But the big challenge we face in the NHS, and it's not just the NHS, this is healthcare systems across the world, is the challenge of an ageing population. And older people have complex needs, sometimes the early stages of dementia, diabetes, they're recovering from a stroke, whatever it is. And the way that we will contain healthcare costs, make sure that the NHS is affordable and continues to deliver the services we all need, is by focusing on prevention, not cure, and caring for people better in the community nearer their homes. If I'm Health Secretary after the election, I want to see a transformation in the services offered through our GPs. And I think if you started to introduce charging, you would make it less likely that people would approach the health service, people would get more sick and more ill, and it would end up being more expensive for us in the long run, as well as being worse for the individual concerned. So no to charging, but I do think that if we continue to grow the economy, it is possible to put the extra resources into the NHS that it needs. And I think we can be optimistic about the future of the NHS. And there's a lot of knocking in the NHS. I'll just make one point. Last year, the Commonwealth Fund, which is an independent American think tank, said that our NHS in the last 5 years has become the best healthcare system of any major country anywhere in the world. And I think we can be proud of our local hospitals and the fantastic things that happen day in, day out in the NHS.
Thank you, Jeremy. Patrick.
We absolutely believe in free, at the point of use, a fully funded national health service. We are completely committed to that. So much so that I think so far we are the only party who've said we need to find this £8 billion. We were committed to find it by increasing funding on capital gains tax and to put that funding into the NHS to keep it free at point of use by 2020. We are absolutely clear that the ageing population makes our society a much harder place to live. There needs to be a lot more respect for older people, a lot more way of dealing with their care in the community. One of the issues, obviously, is merging social care with our local resources. And at the moment, that's been commissioned by our local doctors, but they're having to redo the system and look at commissioning social care on a larger scale to get the quantity of scale, the value of the contracts under this new system. Now, there are issues locally about where you're actually going to end up, and I'm very passionate about solving this on a local level, perhaps by creating extra care facilities where people can actually plan and their retirement in a community where they can move out of their homes, their larger empty homes, freeing up family housing, and produce somewhere which is a decent and acceptable and a wonderful place to live. So I want to...
And I'm going to hold you there, Patrick. Just got to try and keep it to a minute and a half if we can, or a minute if we can. Susan. Thank you.
The answer is no. There aren't any services that we think we charge. In fact, the Green Party is committed to making prescription charges free, dentistry free, things that we've found we're paying huge amounts of money for under a heading of the NHS. So we want to look at funding across the board so that we can finance a National Health Service that is world class. And I don't accept that it's been wonderful this past 5 years. It's struggled, and we kind of know that. So we are very committed to maintaining it as a public service and stop any further threats that will make it possible for private companies like Virgin Care that are currently running our community services in this part of the country. We are committed to reversing that and having a fully public service.
Thank you, Susan.
We are also opposed to any charges for NHS services. All the research, international research, shows that when you start to bring in charges, you actually discourage those who are the poorest and the sickest from accessing care. We already pay for the NHS, we pay for it through our taxes. If we started to bring in charges, it would create an inequitable system. In Germany, they were charging a €10 fee for people to see their GP, and they stopped doing that because they found that those who needed to attend most were more likely to be discouraged. But having said that, there is an issue about NHS funding. None of the three main parties are actually seriously addressing the funding crisis which is facing the NHS. They're all talking about this 8 billion, this magic figure. In fact, the funding gap for the NHS by 2020 is estimated to be 30 billion. This 8 billion is the very minimum that is needed if we are to achieve 2 to 3% productivity improvements over the next 5 years. And a paper in the Financial Times the other day by Anita Charlesworth, who is the chief economist of the Health Foundation, says that a 2 to 3% productivity is impossible. It's been 0.4% for the last five years, partly because we've had to employ lots more nurses, quite rightly, in order to provide quality care. So unless the parties actually address the real funding gap in the NHS and also address the massive social care gap, we've had 30% cuts in social care with huge implications for health. Unless they're serious, we're going to end up with an even more underfunded, run-down NHS over the next 5 years. We've already seen cataracts, for example. Fewer cataracts are being done, cataract operation being done now because of underfunding. What's happening? People are being put under pressure to go and get their cataracts done privately. NHS hospitals are now offering cataract operations privately. Frimley Park Hospital, not far from here, is charging £2,400 for a cataract operation. So I think there will be pressure towards charging if we do not ensure that the next government funds the NHS and social care properly, and that's what we're standing for.
Well, the NHS was set up as a system funded through contributions, national insurance and taxation. The idea is that everyone pays in, and then the costs are collectivised, and then the care is provided free at the point of need. And UKIP fully supports that policy. We have no plans whatsoever to charge for any NHS services. We will, however, introduce a restriction so that Any visitors to the United Kingdom are required to have their own private medical insurance for the first 5 years. We believe that will relieve some of the pressures on funding and make it less likely that we will need to charge. But we are fully committed to an NHS free at the point of need for British citizens, and UKIP will additionally put in an extra £3 billion a year, which we will fund from the windfall from leaving the EU. For example, our net contribution to the EU runs into many billions of pounds. Some of that saving can be used and brought back into the NHS.
Thank you.
Celia, thank you for that question. My answer to that is I can't see any service where we should be charging for it. Louise is correct. My mantra as regards the way forward, as regards the funding streams. The other side to it, of course, is the legislation that allows those services to be put out into the private sector, or outsourcing, or what other euphemism you want to say, equates to the same thing, which is the privatisation of the NHS. That is the 2012 Act that allows that to happen, and also the legislation that potentially could come from Europe, which is the great unknown. And hopefully we'll learn more about that tonight and be able to expand on that, and that's the acronym TTIP, which is the trade agreement between Europe and America, which will give multinational corporations the right to bid for services within this country and within Europe. But within that, there's sort of other truths that have been said tonight, which I agree with as well, and that's Jeremy's. Care should be in the community. I do think it's a bit rich, though, when we're looking at a social asset just down the road there at Cobgate, which a matter of a month ago was given the rubber stamp treatment at Kingston to basically shut. It's in the heart of the community. We've also acknowledged as a specialist dementia care home. Now, out of that, and for those that don't know, I campaigned against the closure of Cobgate. I went to Kingston, and I also, under auspices in a non-political environment, set up a public meeting, which was denied for the vast majority of the residents of Farnham into the closure process. So it is a bit rich that we are talking about this care in the community, whilst we, tonight, it's got to be mentioned, we actively sit here and see a community asset going to be mothballed and the residents moved out against their wishes out of that asset.
So we now have 10 minutes or so to open that up amongst the candidates. I'm going to actually start with Jeremy. A number of points being made that you may want to pick up. Where you go?
Okay. First of all, I think it's very important. There's a few things where I need to set the record straight in terms of what's been happening in the NHS. But I think there's also quite a lot of agreement, and we should start by acknowledging, I think everyone agrees that the future is integrated health and social care based in the community, and that's very important. Now, the 30 billion gap in funding that Louise was talking about, that is a gap in funding by 2020-2021 if we do absolutely nothing to improve the way services are delivered. But I don't think it is unreasonable to ask the NHS to make efficiency savings and productivity improvements, just as we ask every other part of the public sector to do that. And that's what we are working through at the moment. And I'll give you one example of an incredible inefficiency in the NHS, and that is the way that they still use paper records throughout much of the NHS. Now, I think that we should have a single electronic health record that you can access anywhere in the NHS. I have perhaps the bravest thing I did as health secretary was to say that I want the NHS to go paperless by 2018. And I hope to still be health secretary so I can be held accountable for that commitment. We have made very good progress so far in doing that. A third of A&E departments can now access GP records, for example, which they couldn't do before. That's very important so that an A&E doctor can see, for example, what someone's allergies are, what their medical history is, whether they had a stroke, and so on. So I do think that we need more money. The issue about privatisation, though, which comes up time and time again. Let's be absolutely clear. The Health and Social Care Act did nothing different with respect to the outsourcing to the private sector. The growth in the private sector, use of the private sector by the NHS, has grown from 4.9% to 6.2% under this government. It's actually grown at half the rate it grew under the last Labour government. And I think for most members of the public, the issue isn't public versus private. It's good care versus poor care. And what we inherited were some terrible tragedies in places like Midstaffs, Morecambe Bay, hospitals where terrible care had persisted for many years. And what I have done, I just made this point, I have introduced a new regime to turn around some of that poor care, and I think we've made very good progress, and patients now say our NHS care has never been safer or more compassionate. Thank you.
If you look at Midstaffs and Morecambe Bay, and you ask why things went wrong there, you can't separate it from the whole issue of the creation of foundation trusts. Foundation trusts are meant to be freestanding businesses which compete against each other. This process of turning NHS into a fragmented system of competing providers actually began about 20 years ago, and the process of creating foundation trusts was part of that. And those hospitals that wanted to become foundation trusts had to show that they could make a surplus. So Midstaffs had to show it could save £10 million a year, and they did that by cutting their staff. And that's what Robert Francis said. They put the financial targets ahead of clinical targets, and many wards were seriously understaffed. So the whole process of this commercialisation and fragmentation goes very far back, and the previous Labour government did a lot of that too. But I want to say that the Health and Social Care Act put wings on that process. They've brought in mechanisms that make it necessary for GP commissioners to actually put things out to tender. Recently, in Devon, a CCG wanted to give a community contract to a local NHS trust. They were challenged for doing that by another trust and reported to Monitor, and now there's a big investigation. This is happening around the country. CCGs are feeling pressured to put contracts out to tender. Outsourcing is a form of privatisation. The Health Foundation estimates that it's now 10%. The increase that Jeremy talks about of between 4.9% to 6.1% is actually a 25% increase. It's the direction of travel that matters. The Health and Social Care Act has only just started to kick in with its regulations in 2013. If you want to look at efficiency, now Jeremy said about 30 billion is we can't make any efficiency. We've already made 0.5% annual efficiency savings through holding down staff wages. NHS staff wages have been held down and are worth 15% less than they were at the beginning. We got rid of a layer of managers and actually started paying hospitals far less for the services they're providing. We cannot do another 2 to 3%. Efficiency and productivity, nurses and doctors aren't machines. If you have a nurse looking after double the number of patients, you could say she's doubled her efficiency. But what is the level of quality of that care? And if we want the quality, we need the staff. We will not be able to do that, and it's not serious to actually say that we are just going to do a few things differently. If you want to be efficient, get rid of the Health and Social Care Act, repeal it, get rid of the marketised system. It's a much more efficient system to go back to a fully public NHS.
I just wanted to ask you something, Jeremy, that I was looking at a book that you co-authored that was published in 2005, and it was called Direct Democracy, an Agenda for a New Model Party. And Andy Burnham wrote to you when you took on your role in health and asked you whether what was said in it was true. And one quote was, from this book, which I would like to know whether you still hold with that view, our ambition should be to break down the barriers between private and public provision, in effect denationalising the provision of healthcare in Britain.
May I answer that question? So that book that you're talking about was a collection of essays in which different essays were written by different people. I didn't write the chapter on the NHS. I don't subscribe to those views now. I didn't subscribe to those views before.
Okay. Howard.
Was it bestseller?
Go.
Thank you. What is it? For those that took part in the sweepstake, and there's certain sound bites that I mention every time there's a broadcast or an interview regarding Jeremy and the NHS. One of them is weaponisation of the NHS, which hopefully I will not do tonight. He's taken out 2 of the clubs out of the basket. For those that were in the sweepstake, it took him 15 minutes before he mentioned Mid-Staffs and Morecambe Bay. Now, I don't know if he got the triple up. Did he mention Wales? We'll get the triple up at some stage tonight. Because out of it, as regards a mature environment, and I don't have the millstone around my neck of the guilt from 5 years ago, because I wasn't on the political arena then. And quite rightly, as this lady at the front says, we've got to move on. And we would not be mature, and we would not be able, if, as a party, all parties, irrespective of the colour of the rosettes we wear, didn't learn from the mistakes of the past. And there's plenty further happening before then that I could bring up, like allowing certain individuals free access in hospitals, and we know who we're talking about, a gentleman from Yorkshire. But moving on from that, and out of that, with Wales, it's just a diversionary tactic, Jeremy, to take away from the crisis that the A&E service is in, the NHS is in within England. It's like comparing chalk and cheese. You've got a country of about 3 million people compared to England, which is 50-odd million. How can you compare the two as regards provision? You've got a country that is predominantly rural. How can you compare that to an inner city environment like London or Manchester or Leeds? You can't do it. Very deep. Okay, thank you. But out of that, and we talk about the aspects of failings, and one that is on your watch, where's the Rose report? Why have you not released the Rose report before the general election? Before the general election? The Rose report's not finished? Okay then.
Just one point on the privatisation issue. Nobody's mentioned PFI yet. Now, private finance initiatives, these exploded under the last Labour government. I believe they signed over 100 such contracts. For around 50 billion of assets, we are paying back, the taxpayer is paying back around 300 billion compounded. So that's a huge waste. And UKIP will encourage local authorities to buy out their PFI contracts where it's affordable to do so. And we will stop further use of PFI in the NHS. And we've all read the stories about the charging of £200 to change a light bulb, for example. So it's really ridiculous. We will stop that, and a vote for UKIP will be a vote against PFI.
Just to say, I agree on PFI. I don't think most local authorities, though, would have the money to actually buy them out. But we think the government should centralise those debts to take the burden off individual hospitals, and then from that very much more position of strength, should renegotiate them down to a fair value.
And just finally, very briefly, obviously people are worried about the direction of travel in the NHS, and we don't have any control of it. We fear that these contracts are not under any scrutiny. And I think if anything we can bring in the next Parliament is better scrutiny for people. The area health boards certainly have politicians involved, and the Surrey trusts, but now it's devolved to the doctors. There's a couple of lay people on their meetings. They're very impenetrable meetings. So I think if anything, we can bring more understanding and accountability to the process of how the CCGs are working with our money, then that would be a much better thing. People are also worried about TTIP. We're not sure we're getting a clear answer. The simplest thing is just to say we're going to exclude it, like the French have excluded their entertainment industry, believe it or not. So there are issues where we can reassure the public going forward.
Thank you. I can't, because you have the Minister for Health here, or I'm not actually sure. Are you still the Minister for Health? Okay. So just 10 seconds and then we must move on.
A couple of things that Howard
Really
said.
quick.
I do think that the campaign by Labour on the NHS has been disgraceful. And the reason I mention Wales is very straightforward, because the NHS...
You're not above hitting below the belt yourself.
But I think it's very important. You mentioned it, and I want to tell you why. And the reason is this, because
10 seconds.
I run the NHS in England. Other parties run the NHS in other parts of the country. The whole NHS has pressures every winter. And to
Next
say that
question.
the problems in A&E departments
I'm going to stop.
Okay, well,
No, I understand. I gave you 10 seconds. We need to move on. Okay, so we're moving on to another question. Linda, I'm going to try and get this name wrong. I'm sorry, Celia. Linda Sherlock. Very good.
Good evening. Thank you, Gavin. Got my name right. Linda Sherlock. Spelt funny, but you said it beautifully. My question is this. What do you understand of the current housing crisis? And what are your plans to deal with it?
Thank you. So, guys, we've got a rhythm of this, but if we could be really quick with our opening statements and then we'd move to a conversation amongst ourselves, that would be really good. So, Mark.
Right, housing crisis. We have a rapidly rising population in this country. Since the 2001 census, I believe, our population has increased by about 5 million people. So there is huge pressure which is going to lead to the demand for houses. We do need more houses. I think to keep up we need to build one every 7 minutes or something like that. It's a ridiculous figure. UKIP will prioritise development on brownfield sites. So we will offer tax incentives, VAT incentives for the developers, and an exemption from stamp duty for the first sale of the houses on the brownfield sites, because we don't want to encourage greenfield development. We prefer the use of brownfield. That's one way we will help. But the housing crisis is not going to go away. You cannot have that level of population growth without there being an effect on housing.
I think it's you, Howard.
Is it me?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. The aspects of the housing crisis within South West Surrey is manifold. The first one is the lack of social housing. There is no plan for the building of social housing. Historically, what do? You borrow the money to purchase the equipment, well, to basically build the social housing. It has always been a long-term investment and it's paid dividends. Hence the sell-off in the 80s under a different regime. Under the Thatcher government, I'll name her. She's not here to counteract me, so I'll say it. It was Thatcher that did it. Sold off the council stock, basically. Whatever term you want to use for it, social housing, I mean council housing. What should be happening, and it isn't for us as prospective MPs to be doing this, because it's out of our remit. It's down to the local councils, it's down to the local authorities to do that. Money has never been as cheap as it is now to borrow. We should do that for the long-term good of the local community. Whilst ever we've got the system where we've got the buy-to-let market and we've got affordable housing, this euphemism called affordable housing, which in South West Surrey equates to affordable houses 80% of the market value. We're talking properties of starter homes in excess of £250,000. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, that is still, you know, a lot of money for a first-time buyer. It's out of my remit. I work, you know, I've got what I class as a very good job. If as an MP, I would not possibly be able to live down in South West Surrey. I might have to move up to London or get another second home somewhere else. I don't know. But the aspect behind it, you're quite correct. The social housing, that's for the local people, because you go on the waiting list, and there's thousands. There's over 1,000 people on the waiting list for council properties within the catchment area of South West Surrey. That is an issue. The other issue, and I shan't name them because I don't want to give them publicity, but this was put through my door today, and it's basically highlighting the fact of the local housing market. House prices have gone up 14% in Farnham, and it's been driven by people coming with ready money from London to do a commute. And also within there, they're giving advice as regards the pension pot that people can now draw off and spend as they're suggesting you buy homes to let. So where's that leave people? A, A, to buy, and B, to get an affordable let.
Thank you. Thank you.
Housing is such a contentious issue. The LibDems have got various national policies about home to rent, help to buy schemes, that kind of thing. But that's absolutely no point if you don't have any housing stock. And round here, as I disagree with Howard, you need some strong local leadership. You cannot have an area without a local plan. And you really need to have a local plan not designed by NIMBYs. It's a disaster. We're trying to hold back the tide here, and we really need some proper local leadership. Obviously, there are a lot of brownfield sites in the area which need to be developed first, but unless people actually get a grip with that, make some decisions, make some leadership, then the government will literally give planning permission on every hop field that is up for speculative development. So right now, locally, we really need a local plan in place which says, not here, but there. And it's up to you guys to be involved in that process. At the moment, we haven't had much local leadership. The neighbourhood plan ideas are brilliant because you can actually designate the areas that you want development in, and you can do that from a local level. The problem that we really have is that our national leaders and our county leaders are just completely allergic to have any kind of decision. I think there was one Farnham council on the Hopfields decision at Waverley this week. One Farnham council. I mean, what to? Okay. How is that? Local people making a local decision. It is a disaster in Waverley.
It's true that there is a problem. There's around about 2,500 families on the waiting list in this area. They don't all live in this area now, but they want to be in this area. And we all know that there is a shortage of land, and we're in a beautiful part of the world. Much of it is protected. We don't want to build on it. The brownfield site, yes, is good if the infrastructure is there, if Waverley is talking to Surrey County Council and they can agree on the roads and the support services. But there's also another thing about the building. There is a tendency to overbuild. There's hardly any gardens now for these new homes. So we want to see a different approach to building, and particularly we want to see the priority being social rented homes, genuinely affordable homes for people on lower incomes. And we would like those houses and homes to be carbon neutral, not crammed closely together, with a community growing area so that people can grow their own vegetables, they can support each other, build a strong community. And we believe if we build something of that quality and it doesn't pollute the surrounding areas, then it becomes more acceptable to be building on the peri-urban parts of our villages. So that's our
Yes, there is a huge crisis in housing. Houses have become unaffordable. The cost of average cost for a house in Surrey is many times the average income, and certainly beyond the reach of many first-time buyers. And also rent has gone up. In fact, people can hardly even afford to, they can't afford to rent, they can't afford to buy. We do need more housing, we need more affordable, we need more social housing. Affordable housing, 80% of market value, that's not affordable unless you're a millionaire. So we need social housing, we need more council housing. I've not met anybody here who actually says they're against development and against more housing. People here recognise that to have homes for their children and for the growing community, they do need more housing. But people are concerned about the kind of housing, where it's being located, and the planning regulations. There's a lot of criticism, quite rightly, of Waverley Borough Council for not producing a local plan yet. But I think beyond that, we should look at the government. They brought in some very bizarre planning laws. They brought in laws that actually tipped the balance of power towards developers and away from the communities. They brought in this concept of getting rid of a concept of consumption in favour of what they call sustainable development, but then they've defined nearly all development as sustainable because they've defined sustainability as anything that leads to any kind of growth. So it's very hard to argue against any development anywhere. They've taken away the requirement to prioritise brownfield sites, and they've taken away the requirement to look at the impact of traffic and traffic congestion when you're considering where houses go. So I think the first thing, although on a local level we do need a good local plan and we do need genuine engagement, I actually think the voice of the community is very weak, however you do it. And I think at the level of, you're talking about electing your MP here, this is what MPs should do. They should be going to Parliament, working with, I think this could even have cross-party support, and actually look at repealing some of those ridiculous laws, which are actually behind all these problems that we're facing just now.
I agree with some of what Louise has said, but you can't have it both ways. You can't say there's a crisis in housing and we're not building enough houses, and then criticise the government for putting in place laws that try and unblock that. When we came to power, we had the lowest rate of house building since the Second World War. We've actually turned that round. We've got house building going. But I grew up in this area. I grew up in a village called Kaye, not too far away from here, and it's a very special area. It's a very beautiful area, and I think it's incredibly important as we look at development that we do make sure it protects the special character of our area. But there's something else that's really important in the character of our area, and that is young people who grew up here finding that they are able to continue to live here, and they're finding that very difficult. If you look at the facts, average house in Waverley, according to the last figures I saw, is £325,000. The average salary or income in Waverley is £46,000. Lots of people on less than that, but that is the average. So if you got a mortgage on the average salary and you wanted to buy the average house, there is a gap of £187,000. And that is a lot of money for people who want to live in the area that they grew up in. And that's why I do think in the end we have to find a way of building more houses. Otherwise we risk this area becoming an enclave for people who are very wealthy, who work in London, and actually a place that it's difficult for local people who grew up locally, who work locally, to get their foot on the housing ladder. And I think we need to protect that character of our community as well and stop it going in that direction. So I do think that whilst we want sustainable development, we also need to make sure that we are getting enough houses built so that we're giving opportunity for young people to do what most people in this room have been able to do in their own lives, which is to have that very wonderful feeling of owning your own house.
Of course I'll come in. The thing is, the difference is with what I said, I give a solution to the issue. We could build 100,000 domes, but there's still a gap of £187,000, as you quite rightly say. So where's the money coming from? What is the solution to these people with the wage gap between the cost of the property?
Well, the reason for the gap is because there is such a shortage of housing. It's supply and demand, and that's the reason. The way that you
I offer the solution. Where's your solution?
Well, my solution is to allow houses to be built in a way that is sustainable, but make sure there is affordable housing amongst the houses that are being built, and that is what is starting to happen after that very big logjam that we experienced in 2010 when we had the financial collapse.
Thank you, Jim. And Mark, you want to come in? I thought you'd like to.
Yeah, a couple of quick points. Louise mentioned the local voice not being strong. We have a policy in UKIP for binding local referendums if triggered by 5% of the electors to oppose new planning developments. But far from being a charter for NIMBYism, what this would do is force local authorities to come up with plans in the first place that are acceptable. So they would have to take account of infrastructure, roads, schools and so on. So that's one way of getting proper planning locally. And Jimmy mentioned supply and demand. We need to look at the demand side of that equation, Jeremy, because in an era of large-scale migration, as I mentioned, 5 million roughly since 2001, there are going to be shortages. You just cannot keep up with the numbers of people coming in. And one argument for immigration control is just this, to relieve this kind of pressure. And we can't do that as long as we remain within the EU.
Well, Can I answer that point directly? Okay. Yes, of course, we need to control immigration. It's also the case that 20% of our doctors are immigrants, and so we also need immigrants who do a fantastic job.
So there was a recent study on eco-villages. Every borough council built a garden village, a garden city of around 3,000 houses. You would get the scale, the 40% of social housing and affordable housing that development can bring. And you could also deal with the developer contributions which is needed for infrastructure to fund a sustainable community. But of course, we don't have the sites. Most of these authorities are panicking about adding town extensions. Here in Waverley, we've got a plan for about 8,500 homes in the next 20 years. It's madness that 3 of the 4 options in the last local plan were Dunsfold, and suddenly the council's rowing back and going, well, actually, we're not sure if we can even do that now because there might be a bit of traffic. This is absolute nonsense. We need local leadership on this. That's a fantastic opportunity to really deliver some affordable housing there, live workplaces, really exciting stuff. And if you want to be involved, do get involved in your neighbourhood plan, because that is the place where you can say, not here, but there. Otherwise, the government's coming straight at you and saying, tough, you've got no decisions, it's going to be there.
Thank you, Patrick. Mark.
On that point about doctors, we welcome foreign doctors, and with a policy of visas, we would allow. Look, Australia has visa controls. They don't have any shortage of doctors and nurses in their health service. So UKIP welcomes foreign doctors. They'd be first in line for work permits.
Okay, we may come to that later on in the evening. Just finally, Louise, did you want to say briefly?
Jeremy said, well, the housing market will provide, if there's demand, and they'll provide supply, and there'll be enough houses, implying at all the different prices that people need. But if that's the case, why hasn't that happened so far? There's been a housing crisis for several years. It's been several years now that people haven't been able to afford housing, and the developers haven't built affordable housing. In fact, they're more likely to sit on land, hoard land, and actually wait for it to go up in value. And there is research suggesting that there's a potential to build 1.5 million homes on land which is already in the possession of these developers. So I think we should actually, a land value tax might be one way of approaching making these guys release that land so that it can be built on. The other thing is councils have been stopped from reinvesting the receipts from their council house sales or from their rents in new housing. Housing associations have been forced to build homes and charge 80% rents. So there's been, they've squashed down on, with legislation, the ability for councils and housing associations to actually build enough homes for people that they can afford. So I do not think leaving it and waiting for developers to meet this need is the answer. I think there has to be much more proactive legislation from the centre and also locally to make sure enough houses are built.
Thank you.
Just to emphasise that what Patrick said I am in agreement with, the local plans are shambles, it's years out of date, and whilst it's years out of date, the only people that will be benefiting, it's not us, it's the developers, it's the landowners, and it's the builders. That's the truth.
Guys, I'm going to really have to keep us to time because there are a lot of questions to get through, and if I sometimes cut people off, it's because I know what questions are coming. So, I'm going to move to the next question, which has been asked and was chosen by the group, but the person who asked it has asked to remain anonymous, so I'm going to read it. Are you concerned about the growing equality in income between rich and poor in this country? If so, what would you like to do about it? Howard.
Thank you. Thank you, Anonymous. I don't know where you are, but I'll answer via Gavin.
Really quickly.
Okay, thank you. Of course it's there. You know, it's quite correct. You know, you've got the situation where there's a minimum wage, which is not enough. It's recognised that you need a living wage. And then you've got super rich millionaires making £80,000 profit because of the tax cuts that's been engendered to them. Within society, and possibly don't see it as much in South West Surrey as they do in other parts of the country, those with the broadest shoulders are not paying the appropriate amount of money to support those at the bottom end of the income streams. Thank you.
If you just put one central point, it would be really helpful rather than us.
There are more millionaires and billionaires than ever before in this country, but we have people who cannot afford to eat properly. There are actually food banks in every town in South West Surrey. So we need to make changes to start to reverse that growing inequality. We would call for a £10 minimum wage, working towards that by 2020, and before then the living wage for everybody. But we also think, look at Osborne's tax cuts in the budget. 3/4 of the people who benefited from those tax cuts were the better off. He has actually exacerbated that difference, so we do need to reverse that approach and have a policy that helps poor people, people on middle incomes, people who are struggling, whether it's their incomes or their cost of their housing, and across the board. There's a lot we need to change to reverse this inequality.
Thank you.
One point if I can. For the poorest, we've increased the tax allowance threshold, £825 for 26 million people have had a tax cut through being a coalition trying to deliver a fairer society, and we want to go further with further £400 tax cut. For the richest in society, diverted profits tax. A lot of profits are going abroad. Facebook paid £3,100 in tax this year. An average teacher on a £27,000 salary paid £3,500 tax. So that can't be right, and we've got to do something about it.
Thank you. Well, I think we need to look at the facts. The rich are paying more tax now than they were 5 years ago. 3 million of the poorest people, well, these are the facts, 3 million of the poorest people have been taken out of tax. Inequality is not growing, it has actually gone down. Child poverty has gone down under this government. And why is that? Why is that? Because there is a fundamental difference of opinion between Labour and the Conservatives. We have created under David Cameron 1,000 jobs every single day. Work is the way to help people out of poverty. And because we have got more people into work, because we've got one of the highest rates of employment in our history, poverty and inequality are going down. You may not like it, but those are the facts.
I will. Let me get everyone in first. Good evening, Farnham. Susan, very briefly, 1 point if you can, or, you know.
Okay. The Green Party doesn't accept the austerity rhetoric that we've been hearing, and we certainly don't accept that it's necessary for the future. We believe that you've got to invest now in this country, make this country stronger, generate more income. If you invested in renewable energy, for instance, you would generate thousands of jobs. But we need to invest. That's the only way we're going to create the kinds of money that we need in this country and for the poorer people to benefit. Quantitative easing, when it was introduced, benefited the rich. It was something like 8 pence of that quantitative, those billions of quantitative easing that benefited ordinary people. And that inequality is getting worse. I don't accept that it's not. It's blatant in every situation. We have young people sleeping in car parks. But you can't say that things are better than they were. I don't accept it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, the one point. The large disparity is worrying. UKIP will take those on a minimum wage off of income tax altogether, because we don't think that you should be paying tax to the government until you're earning enough to live on. We will also help those on middle incomes by increasing the 40% threshold to 55,000. But many people are paying high rates of tax who were never intended to. But we do need to be careful about some of these proposed solutions, because if you tax the rich, there comes a point where your tax revenues start to fall. We live in a globalised economy, people can just leave, they can move their money elsewhere. And this idea of a £10 minimum wage, this also, we have to think about that very carefully, because What happens if your labour is not worth £10 an hour? What happens if your productivity is less than £10 an hour? It becomes
Everyone's worth £10 an hour.
No, but what if the company can't afford to pay that? It could increase unemployment. So we need to be very careful about these proposed solutions. We need to go for economic growth. I suggest we start to deregulate the economy. Let's kickstart the economy by scrapping the thousands of laws that come out of the EU.
You're talking about worrying about rich people leaving the country if we start to tax them too much. First of all, the poorest 10% pay about 45% of their income on average on tax, and the richest 10% pay only 38% of their income in tax. So the poorest 10% are heavily taxed, not just income tax but also council tax and the impact of VAT. If you pay people the minimum wage, if you pay people £10 minimum wage, there are people who will have money in their pockets to spend. When these are not people who are going to hoard the money or save it or go out of the country, they're going to spend it in the local economy, they're going to spend it on goods and services. That is going to stimulate the economy. There is no evidence at all that paying people properly is actually detrimental to the economy.
Just going to finish them up.
To answer Jeremy's question, the fundamental difference between this party and what I represent is this. I actually care about people. That's the difference. I care about people. You falsely say you do, but I can see in your body language you don't. And it's like this. The facts are this. You need to get some new facts, because the reality is what you've just mentioned is not what I'm seeing out there. I'm not seeing that out there. So get some more facts, put them onto this stage, and tell the people the truth. The reaction you got is the reaction that I'm giving you now, which is this. They're not believing you, Jeremy.
No, you've got to let me respond if I'm being attacked, Gavin. Okay, Jeremy, I'm being okay, then I don't think it's fair sharing. If I'm attacked and I'm not allowed to respond.
I have to treat people the same. Thank you, and I'm sorry that you feel that. Okay, move on. So, Hugo Alexander, what I asked for earlier on, is he in the room? Yeah, good, very good. Just give us a second, we'll give you a microphone.
Can Britain go it alone outside the EU? Because I'm not sure they can.
So the question is, can Britain really go it alone outside of the EU? Mark.
Probably a place to start. Well, the answer here is yes to that. What benefit do we get by being in the EU? People talk about the common market, single market. What is that? That is effectively a free trade area, plus a very large body of regulations, which are very burdensome on business, plus a customs union, plus free movement of labour. Now, what UKIP says is we want free trade with the European Union, but we don't want those other things because they hold us back and they cause problems. So, by divorcing ourselves from political union, we can carry on trading with Europe. The EU has trade agreements with over 100 countries around the world. They have full access to the single market, but they're not bound by the regulation. There's no threat to their sovereignty. They don't have to abide by the free movement principle, which causes large-scale immigration. So the answer is yes, we can. The EU is declining in its share of global GDP. Other parts of the world are growing rapidly, but all the while we're within the customs union of the single market, we are actually forbidden from negotiating our own free trade agreements. So, for example, Iceland has a free trade agreement with China. Tiny Iceland was able to negotiate that. We can do the same once we release ourselves from the shackles of the EU.
successful because we are, as a country, we are a strong, independently minded country. However, the reality is, no, we can't. There's so much benefit comes out of Europe, which is never mentioned. Tell the people of North Wales that with the subsidies they get from there. Tell the people down in Devon and Cornwall with the subsidies there. Tell the 5,000 people that are reliant on EU membership for their jobs within South West Surrey. That is part of the benefits that we receive from being in the EU. And to finish off, as regards the parties, I don't know the political stance of the National Health Action Party, the Greens. The Labour Party is the only one that is saying we will not be having a referendum in the next 5 years when we're successful on May the 8th. That referendum will not be there.
There's no point in trying to leave the EU. The benefits far outweigh the costs or regulation. We need to be in the EU to reform it. In a global society, Europe needs to be on par with America and China and pulling its weight. The costs to us after paying, getting the rebates back, about 37 pence a day. So I've clubbed together 37 pence that Mark to stay for one more day, just so we can finish this argument. And people like Norway, who are out of the EU, but still pay to be part of that trade agreement, recently said, don't do it. There is no benefit for removing ourselves from just that trading relationship. It's absolutely no point.
There are many benefits to EU membership. In the 40 years since we've been in the common market, the quality of the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe have all been better regulated. We've got better working hours, we've got better maternity conditions, we've got better health, safety of medicines. There's a lot of cooperation across the EU around issues to do with the environment and protection. So these are the benefits. But it's also clear that there are major issues with the EU. It is not there's a huge democratic deficit. It's very opaque, it's very open to lobbyists who have got huge influence, and many people feel very remote from the workings and the decisions of the EU. So it desperately needs reforming. But just as I would look at our parliamentary system and say, there's lots wrong with that, there's lots about that that's not particularly democratic, it needs reforming. I'm not saying let's get out of it, I'm saying let's reform and change it. So I would say the same, very, very powerful efforts to try to reform the EU, but we should remain in it.
Well, there are good things that we get from our membership of the EU, as Louise says, and there are also bad things that Mark talks about, a loss of sovereignty that comes with membership of the organisation like the EU. The question is it right for Britain as it is now? And I don't believe it is. I think there are some real problems in our relationship with the EU. The fact that people can come to the UK, look for work, not find work, and then claim welfare from British taxpayers and live here is not right, and we need to stop that. The fact that, you look around the world, the most dynamic economies are in Asia and America, and too often bureaucracy and regulation in the EU hold us back. And David Cameron is the only person who could be Prime Minister who is offering to renegotiate our relationship with the EU to deal with some of those issues and then give the British people a say as to whether they want to stay in the EU or not. And I think we have the chance to reform and improve our relationship with the EU on the basis of that renegotiation. But most importantly, I profoundly disagree with what Tony Blair said last week when he said this issue is too important to allow the British people to decide. That is wrong. The British people are quite grown up enough to decide these things for themselves, and they should be given that choice.
I'm proud to be British, and I'm proud to be European. I don't see myself as anything outside of Europe. I think it would be entirely inappropriate if we tried to carve ourselves out of Europe. We gain the most important thing is the Human Rights Act, and that's what keeps the check when things go wrong in this country. People can go to Europe and have have protection that sometimes we fail in this country. So I think Europe, if for nothing else, is vitally important for our basic human rights.
Just address a few points. Jeremy quite rightly disagreed with Mr. Blair's comments. Doesn't want to trust the British people how to say. Well, Jeremy, why have you voted in Parliament against having a referendum? You can see your record in Parliament. You voted against it a number of times. You voted against and in favour of transfer.
I voted in favour of giving the British people. I voted for James Wharton's bill. Unfortunately, it didn't become law because we didn't have a majority.
This was brought in only because of the UKIP threat to the Conservative Party. But prior to that, you've been against it, as has the majority of the Conservative Party. With respect to regulations and the NHS, what about the Working Time Directive and the effect on the NHS? That's a big issue. The Royal College of Surgeons say so. It loses hundreds of thousands of hours of doctor time. Now that is something you can't reform, you can't get rid of it. You have to leave the EU to get rid of that. And then in terms of this Norway issue,
I'm actually old enough to remember the young doctor working 100 hours a week. I actually remember sleeping in a toilet because it was actually, I thought the 10 minutes walking back to the mess was actually 10 minutes I couldn't spare because I was exhausted. I don't think I was safe. The European Working Time Directive for young doctors and especially junior doctors, I'm totally behind it. The Royal College of Surgeons is just highlighting some issues around training, and it may be that there might be other ways to make sure that young surgeons get enough exposure, but we're not going to go back to those days.
Surely I want to decide these issues. So we decide them here in this country, and we take the decision that's best for our own National Health Service.
It has the support of the profession, the working time, it has the support of the medical profession.
So, okay. Did you want to come back on the okay, we're going to move on. Right, we've got a couple more questions to go. So, Philip Jackson. Very good, the microphone's coming.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, panel. My question is as follows. Would the candidates please explain the pros and cons of the UK being signed up for the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership? Otherwise known as TTIP. I am particularly concerned about the effect it will have on our democracy, as well as its impact on the NHS. Please discuss.
Thank you. And if we could keep to one central point and then we'll move to conversation. Susan, do you want to start with this one?
Yes, I was at a previous Hustings where the Conservative representative said that there was absolutely nothing to worry about with the NHS and TTIP, and it was scaremongering to even suggest there was an issue. And it surprised me, that response, because it's all been done in secret. So how did he know? So what we're worried about and why we are campaigning so vigorously to keep everybody on their toes is that we know that there is a movement to privatise the NHS, and we know that at the moment the kinds of negotiations with TTIP, the trade agreement, makes those aspects of the NHS vulnerable, and we want it excluded and taken out of the equation completely. But we'd also like to have some information about these negotiations because their implications are enormous. There is a reducing of standards possible on foods coming over from America. There are a number of issues that we would be genuinely concerned about. So it shouldn't be happening in secret. It should be something that's out in the open and we can be involved in. And then if we understood what was going on, then we could argue in a different way, but while it's secretive, we can only protest.
Thank you.
The pros of TTIP is obviously a level playing field in this trade negotiation between continents. We've got Europe and we've got America, and obviously developing economies in China and the Far East, and it's about creating a level playing field for companies to trade on. It's about creating certainty for product design, product ingredients to be sold into those markets. So there is some good benefit. I think potentially it could be worth about £30 billion to our economy through the trade with America. There are obviously a lot of scaremongering and issues which aren't resolved because this is being debated or negotiated in secret. These negotiations have to be done in secret because otherwise the other party would know what you were negotiating. You can't go into that with everything on display. There's a couple of reassurances that we could ask for here. Vince Cable has addressed this and got letters back from the European Commissioner who's negotiating it, saying there's absolutely no reason for the NHS to be part of these contracts because it is a single supplier. It is publicly funded money that is not open to a large contract bid. But having said that, we need some reassurance from our politicians who are leading the way. So, as I said before, you could potentially exempt it. Just say, look, the NHS is exempted from this, full stop, and that would certainly end a lot of disquiet about the process. There's one slightly reassuring thing that a colleague mentioned to me is that this is a European negotiation, so it's not just Britain that's part of this negotiation. It has to be ratified by all the countries, so you've actually got to have the French involved, who are generally saying no to a lot of the stuff, and even Greece has got to be involved in ratifying this treaty. So I think a lot of it will be watered down to basic trade agreements, and what we want is that reassurance that that's not going to impact on some of our services.
Okay, thank you. Howard.
Is it me? Thank you. I think the common consensus from us up here, and obviously Jeremy's still to speak it, and hopefully you'll be able to put some more meat on the bones being in the position you are as regards what TTIP is and where we're going with that, because it is being done in secret for whatever reason it is. And quite an eminent QC said to me a matter a few months ago in a briefing, he said to me, if a politician tells you that they know what's in TTIP, he's a liar, or they're a liar. That's what he said to me, it's just because they don't know. It is being done at a level that's above them. So it'll be interesting to see what you say, Jeremy, as regards what the implications. Now, no, it's not going to be nice. I listened to Jeremy on LBC a few months ago, and Jeremy gave absolutely massive reassurances as regards the NHS being excluded from TTIP. I listened to that and I thought, well, we'll come to that's what I heard, and hopefully Jeremy will back me up, or he might call me a liar, who knows. But the aspect behind it, the NHS, of course it should be excluded. It's just digging a festering sore. It's on top of the 2012 Act. It's just another mechanism to bring in multinational companies to potentially bid for those services. And the other side to it, what people don't understand is, if those multinational companies, and we're talking companies that have more income than a lot of nations out there, if they're dissatisfied with the procedure, and if they lose a contract or don't get a contract, they can actually take the country responsible to the ISDS, which is the Investor State Dispute Resolution. Basically, they can sue governments. And that is a danger, because certainly within the, and it was mentioned, I can't remember who mentioned it now, certainly within the food industry and in certain other industries, our regulations are a lot stricter than the American systems. And if they're allowed to bring in things like E-numbers and other additives to food into this country, we say no and they say, well, we're going to sue you as a sovereign state. That is a danger, and that fills me with worry.
Well, I hope I can reassure you, Howard. What is TTIP? TTIP is a free trade agreement between the EU and the US. Now, I actually believe in free trade. I think it's the foundation of our prosperity. It's created hundreds of thousands of jobs over very many years in our country. What it is not, and we must be absolutely explicit about this, it is not any kind of mechanism that could require publicly run services to be contracted out to the private sector. And this is not something that Conservative politicians in London are saying. This is what the EU chief trade negotiator said, it's what the EU commissioner said, it's what the US chief trade negotiator said. So the decision about whether services are provided by the state or provided by the private sector remains a decision of national governments. And so in that sense, the NHS is completely excluded from TTIP. Those decisions and the structures we have at the moment are made by local groups of GP commissioners. They are not made in any other way, and they wouldn't be forced to contract services out to the private sector. But I would just make this bigger point. The NHS is expensive. I agree with Louise, we need more doctors, more nurses, more investment in our NHS. We can do that on the back of a strong economy. That strong economy needs jobs generating tax revenues, it needs investment from overseas, and it means being open to things like trade that can generate wealth and prosperity for everyone. And so that's why I think we have to recognise that growing the economy by doing these kinds of free trade deals actually will help the NHS, it will make us richer and more prosperous, and that means more money for the NHS.
You asked about the pros and the cons. In theory, reducing tariffs encourages trade, and trade is a good thing. But TTIP is not really about reducing tariffs because they've almost all gone anyway. It's actually about deregulating. It's about reducing what is seen as barriers to trade, because our regulations in Europe on many things, from food to medicines to environment to chemicals to employment rights, are of a higher standard than in the United States. And it's about reducing and losing some of our most precious rights that we have. And that's the real risk. Now, it is being negotiated in secret. And of course, some negotiations should be secret. You don't negotiate your bottom line if you're doing some sort of bidding thing. But what's in it should not be secret. There should be, we as a people should be able to say, we do not want certain things to be included in this free trade agreement. For example, we don't want our public services included, we don't want our NHS included. Now, we've been hearing all kinds of things. Sometimes we're told, no, NHS is definitely not included. Then other times we're told, yes, everything's on the table. And it keeps changing. Latest things that we're getting from Europe and all these false assurances are that because the NHS is a public service, there is no way that anybody can dictate to the British government whether they have to privatise it or change it. But we lost that right a while ago because the NHS is no longer considered under EU law to be a public service. Once it became something where competition came in, it became subject to EU competition law. Now, recently Andy Gordon, for example, Andy Gordon said he wanted to make the NHS into the preferred provider, and he was criticised for that by Simon Stevens and by the King's Fund, who said you cannot make the NHS preferred provider because EU competition law prevents that. If it's preventing that already, then being part of TTIP is no assurance that those same mechanisms that force you to put things up to tender wouldn't be part of it. But we're not saying that TTIP is going to privatise NHS. The current government has done a really good job at starting that going into that. TTIP could make privatising irreversible because investor-state dispute settlement, offshore tribunals, above and beyond our sovereign courts, could actually bring cases against our government if it ever wanted to reverse privatisation. That's already happened in other trade deals. It's already happened with Slovakia, for example, so it's not impossible.
Look, I just say to Louise this, if what she says is the case, why would the EU Chief Trade Negotiator, why would the EU Commissioner responsible for this deal say that it won't force the British government to privatise NHS services? Those are their words. They're the people who are in charge of these negotiations. They're absolutely clear about that. And I don't think that there could be any better evidence than that, than what the people who are in the responsible positions in the EU are actually saying.
First of all, I think it's a straw man argument. We're not saying that is going to force the privatisation of the NHS. We're talking about the irreversibility of it. Why would this guy be trying to assure us? I mean, they are desperate to get this through. They've had 150,000
Yes.
contributions to their
I thought you guys love the EU.
No, Garcia Bracero wrote this letter. They have done they're doing a charm offensive.
You're
They're so disturbed by the opposition that's mounted across Europe and in America as well.
Okay. Did you want to?
No, so that's the point. I don't think you can trust them. Just one more point. Heavily lobbied.
I'll be brief. Pros and cons. Free trade is a pro. So I'm in favour of global free trade. Let's trade with the whole world. That's great. But the EU, as I said earlier, is a customs union, so it negotiates free trade deals on our behalf. Successive Conservative governments have given up these powers, and we no longer have control. It's an example of loss of sovereignty that Jeremy was talking about. Is he proposing to bring back trade negotiations to the remit of Parliament to mitigate that? The trade deal is very complicated because it's negotiated on behalf of all 28 members of the EU. That's why it takes so long and is so protracted. So you've got French protectionism, for example. They have particular needs. The Germans have other needs. And post-Lisbon Treaty, these trade deals are decided by qualified majority voting. So the UK doesn't even have a veto on TTIP. Mr. Cameron could not veto this if the majority wanted to go ahead. So doesn't this just demonstrate? Louise said, we as a people, she said, do not want certain things included. Well, sorry, you don't have that say, Louise. As long as we're in the EU, these things are not within our power to decide.
Before I move to the last question of the evening, I'm going to ask for fairly short answers to it. So, may I hold it up? Well, I think it's good.
Good evening. What should I say to my grandchildren to encourage them to vote in our general elections, when in reality, millions who vote for small parties will get no voice in Parliament?
Jeremy.
Well, I think in this election we are seeing the smaller parties being given a much bigger voice in the media than they've ever been given. And I think it's up to people to make their choice. But I would say that in the end, the most important decision is about who people want to be the next Prime Minister of our country. I think we have two very different visions, and people need to think carefully. They can vote for a smaller party, but in the end, David Cameron or Ed Miliband are going to be our next Prime Minister. And in the end, that is going to be the most important thing for every single person in this room, including young people as well.
God help us!
Young people, we've got a plan for the future, and young people look back perhaps on this recent coalition government as pretty historic. It's the first time this has happened for a long time. It is a massive shift in politics. Now you might say that the LibDems haven't come out of this particularly well, but I think, for the benefit of the country, what we've done has been extraordinary in changing both the scene of politics and now potentially the future travel of politics, because as we've seen, it's a multi-party situation. And we were very brave, perhaps, to ask for the alternative vote. I know we weren't successful, but we championed that vision as part of the coalition agreement. There was a chance to change our system back then. Perhaps we'll have a chance to change it again in the future. We can change politics if you vote for other parties, tactical voting, but vote, be engaged in politics. We've seen how it can make a difference. We need to vote at a local level. We've got Waverley and town council elections coming up. That's probably the most important elections, actually, down here, to have a local say, to get people who care passionately about your local services and want to deliver some local leadership. So use your vote wisely and just believe that you can make a difference.
Thank you.
I think people should vote for what they believe in, and they should vote for the party that best represents their views. An interesting fact, if we go back, perhaps back to the war years, or just after the wars, 98% of votes that were cast went to the main two parties, Conservative and Labour. That percentage now is less than 70%. So what we've seen over the years is these two main parties, their hold over the political process is weakening. And we're now in what I would say is a transition period. We're moving now towards a multi-party democracy. The Conservatives have not won an election since 1992, and I'll suggest to you that they are no longer capable of doing so. They cannot form a majority, and they will not. And so we need electoral reform. I'm a full supporter of some form of proportional representation. Don't ask me the details because the different systems are quite complicated, but we do need to move towards a proportional system because the reality has changed.
It's true, things have changed, and I don't think we're ever going to go back to that one party in opposition, one governing situation. We're really genuinely looking for the first time in this country at a multi-party coalition, of which...
My mother. How did it go, Gav? It goes.
So, and this multi-party coalition is potentially between a group of parties. They're smaller parties, but they've got a lot of common ground. And what we could see is that politicians could work together, something we're not familiar with. We see Prime Minister's question time, it's embarrassing. Are we really running a country like that?
I'm gonna hold this there anyway. I'd stay on the tab.
Thank you. Yes, the saddest thing is that many young people don't actually vote, and they don't feel that they have a stake in our democracy. And many of them are actually put right off politics by what they see. There's a lot of sleaze in politics. There's a lot of there's the lobbying, the cash for questions. There's various things that have actually put people off. And also, the other thing is this idea of this two-party, two-horse race, and the feeling that your vote is totally wasted. Now, I think that might be changing slightly, as people talked about possibly for the first time with multi-party government. But I think it's going to be very hard to do that as long as we still have the first-past-the-post system. So I think that unless we have electoral reform and a move towards proportional representation, we're not going to be able to enable people to feel their vote is really worthwhile. If we do move, I still think that people should vote positively for what they believe in, not vote tactically for the least bad or the one that you hate least compared with the one you hate more, or whatever it is. And vote positively. And if you do that, you may well actually get somebody in Parliament who would be independent-minded and would be prepared to stand up for some important issues. I think having one Green MP, just one Green MP, made a huge difference, for example, in actually raising that whole profile of that issue and that agenda. So I think having a mixture in Parliament is fantastic, but I think it's a real struggle with our current system.
Thank you. As representative to what is a small party within South West just have a look at the percentages. But I actually agree with Jeremy. There is going to be just one Prime Minister, and there's it's a two-horse race. Shall we call them horses? I don't know. I'm calling them both horses, so that's fair. Rather than the media, which is doing a character assassination on Miliband as we speak, leading up to the election, because obviously they know who's going to win, I know who's going to win, and on May the 8th, possibly when Jon Snow comes to the edge, you're at the edge at between 4 and 5 in the morning, and the Portillo moments, and you're giving your losing speech. For those that don't know, I've got a bottle of champagne on ice. I'll bring that with me. Win, lose or draw, and I'll shake your hand and I'll say, well done, Jeremy, and you want to become a train driver, that's what I'll say.
Thank you. As a parallel exercise, we've been working with 16 and 17-year-olds to encourage them to engage in political debate. We are continuing that online. At the moment, I'm hesitant to tell you this, but it's a pretty even race between Conservatives and Labour amongst that group, with a small vote for Liberal Democrats. So at the moment, they appear, the 16 and 17-year-olds, to be going for the major parties. I just share it with you. I'm not offering you any analysis.
I did say how wise those pupils.
Okay, that concludes our questions. I hope it's been useful. I hope you feel animated and ready for a debate, and that you feel like you've got something more from the evening. Do you want? No, okay. Thank you. I hope to see you at many, many more of these debates, and that we can continue a debate about the quality and shape of our community.
I just lost it somewhere. And it only slipped. He did very well. Very good.